So much of the research that already exists around pattern understanding and how it relates to maths have been observational studies, and they've really explored at what age children can recognise a certain pattern. But what is missing from the field is a theoretical underpinning of why children can understand certain patterns versus another, and do they increase with complexity, and do certain factors have to be understood before a child can progress their understanding of pattern. So what we've aimed to do in this paper is really explore that theoretical basis for how we understand patterns and how that understanding develops as children age. Our hope is that this paper is really going to help practitioners, both music and education practitioners, looking for ideas of how to introduce either music or maths to children using really interactive pattern games.
The project started when I read a book by a colleague, Sue Gifford. She just completed a book about pattern in maths, and the thing that leapt out on the page for me was how these mathematical patterns, visual spatial patterns, were exactly the same as the musical patterns I was using with children. So I thought, Sue, we've got to get together, and there must be a way of bringing these two things together in terms of children's learning and pedagogical strategies. And that's how the project started.
I think there's a real challenge for practitioners when it comes to working with children and maths. And part of that is driven by the curriculum, which we know is really heavily focused on number. And particularly for children with additional needs who might be non-verbal or be less expressive in terms of verbalization of number, actually finding different techniques and different ways of exploring somebody's mathematical understanding can be really challenging. So this project aims to really give practitioners a clear structure of how pattern understanding develops in children, both from an auditory perspective but also from a visual spatial perspective. And the way that we've done that is to use the existing sounds of intent framework, which has been established for nearly 20 years and has had lots of research conducted with both children with additional needs and with children in mainstream schools, and is really an accepted trajectory of how children's musical understanding develops.
What Sounds of Intent does, it sets out the stages in which children's brains come to grasp musical organisation at different levels of complexity. So the theory was this. Zygonic theory says that music is structured in three basic ways: between notes, between groups of notes, and between frameworks, like tonal frameworks, for example. And it predicted, because those forms of organisation have increasing complexity, Sounds of Intent predicted that these would appear in children's development in a sequence. In other words, children would grasp musical structure in different ways as they grew up through the early years. What we've tried to do here is say, can we read across from the domain of sound into the domain of vision? So are there visual patterns that increase in complexity? And if so, can we map those in children's development? In other words, we'd expect children to grasp simple patterns, first A, followed by more complex patterns, perhaps A, B, A, B, A, B, and then more complex patterns still, like A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. And that's what this paper sets out. It sets out a theory of how that might work, and it then leads into an empirical study that's reported elsewhere.